Hello, everyone. Janine here from the Book Publishing Academy podcast. I'm super excited that you are joining us today because we have a very special guest, Miss Cindy Benezra, that's joining us. She is an author, she's a speaker, she is a sexual abuse survivor and advocate. And we are going to be chatting a little more about her journey into business, into book publishing, and her book. So, thank you so much for joining us, Cindy.
So excited to be here. Seriously. What a pleasure.
I'm really excited to finally get you on the podcast over after a couple of months of talking back and forth, but I'm just super excited to learn more about you and your story. Can you share a little bit? I know that I gave a little introduction, but can you share a little more about you, yourself, and what you do?
Okay. Well, personally, I am a event owner, a event planner. I own it with my daughter and I, and we do kind of luxury weddings, and that's how we keep the lights on at home, and that's what pays the bills. But during this process, I wanted to write a cookbook actually. So I wanted to write a cookbook like of all my good family recipes and then entertaining tips on how to have a beautiful party at your home and just make it as smooth and streamlined as you can. And so in my process of doing this, I was checking through all my recipes. I've always been an avid um, mm, just always interested in food. And I feel like my food is sort of like my shoes. It's like they always tell a story, they're always some part of my life. And so when I was going through my recipes, it took like an entire day. And when I was going through the recipes, I was sorting through kind of like the memories of my life. And then I'm like, oh, yep, that's a good one. And then I would get triggered. I would be like, oh my goodness, I know what happened, when I was 10, or oh my goodness, I know what happened when I was 5. And um, it take me on to being married. So it just kind of took me on my journey of life. And that was my timeline. And when I had it all written down with all these different triggers, I had different notebooks and I looked around me and I had 5. And the one I remember holding my hand over them and holding them. Like one was inspirational quotes and like tools that inspired me and things that helped me. And then the other one was about sexual abuse and the things that I was most ashamed about, the things that were the darkest ones, the ones that I never shared. And then it would have like my fun recipes. The other one was just on, tips for entertaining and inexpensive decor to expensive decor. And there was more to that, but so when I ran my hand over it and I thought, oh great, I'm gonna get this going and I can't wait to tell my daughter. So but when I ran my hand over it and the one that had so much darkness, so much shame, and I thought I couldn't even get through recipe writing without being triggered. And I had to write the experience down just to get that out of my mind. And that's something that I've done as a little girl, as a little kid. And to whatever was in my mind that I didn't want to hold in my body or in anywhere. I just didn't want it to, I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want it to even take space in my body. I would write it down. I would write down on any piece of paper. And it just became a habit of then it became journaling. And sometimes my journaling wasn't even, most of the time it wasn't legible. It wasn't even, I remember stabbing my book because I was so mad, my little pen with my book. And I'm like, oh, I saved this stuff over the years. And some of it I was just like, because it told a story of where I was going. And I used to read it. Sometimes I would tear it up out of anger, like it was part of my life. And then the other times some of it I kept. So as I was going through this, I thought I am going to write a book on on my trauma, on sexual abuse, on all these things that I don't want to talk about, that people don't want to talk about, the thing that had held me like captive, that the most shame. And I thought, I think it's time that we unfold the stigma about our trauma, sexual abuse. I was thinking, why is it that we could talk about opiates and we could talk about um, alcoholism and it's okay, and I thought, well, it's socially acceptable. And so I thought, well, this is stupid. Like, this is because I know the statistics. It's 1 out of 4 girls, 1 out of 6 boys. And those are only the reported cases. So I thought every brave soul out there who went and reported, what about the unreported ones? And this happens all the time, has nothing to do with gender, well, not, it does, but not so much. It still happens. It's a human issue. And I thought, I'm going to write about this. And when I did, I felt so naked. I I think I was re-trauma. I just felt like I went through trauma all over again, and I felt vulnerable out there. I was never really a true vocal person about it, but I had to speak up, and now it's out there. And so then I got more comfortable in that. Um, Now it's just sort of like second nature, and I could talk about it comfortably. I've done lots and lots of different kinds of therapy, alternative stuff. If you told me to stand on my head and it was going to make me feel better, I probably would stand on my head. And, if that's what it was going to take. So I've done so much, and I thought I couldn't have gone through all of this, like all of this, homeless, special needs kid, divorce. I mean, I just thought, okay, life has handed me a a full plate, and I couldn't have gone through all of this and then keep it silent. So that was my journey, and I had a goal of if I could reach 10 people and change their lives, 10, and create that ripple effect and change their life and change the generational trauma that we don't consciously pass down, but on the subconscious level, we pass it down. And I thought if that could be altered just with 10 people, like that's amazing. So that's been my goal in sharing my story. But in the process of doing that, I realized that there are so many people, holding this all in silently alone because we have generations that were ashamed of feeling this. And when you do share it, how it rocks your family and that dynamic of sharing it and why we keep it quiet and silent. So it was a lot of unfolding, and this has been my journey now. I've been doing this for 5 years. And in the meantime, I find the brightest pink flower when I'm decorating, and then I talk about trauma, and that's what I'm doing. The both sides of both, we all have two different coins of ourselves.
Yeah. I love that you well, first of all, I love that you were just looking for recipes so you could write a cookbook and then it evolved into something like something completely different. Because sometimes that's just how life is. You'll start with one thing that you think you're supposed to be doing, and then it's like, no, no, no. That was just to show you what you need to be doing over here. And you took it and you ran with it. So tell us a little bit, because you did end up writing the book. Tell us a little bit about the book and what can a reader expect from the book?
Um, so it's a memoir, but it's a memoir self-help book. So through my journey, I describe how I helped um, go through every obstacle as I was going through the ages. So I started my abuse started at 5 and to 10, and I went through a period of time where I dissociated. And so when I became sexually active at 16, it started to come back in nightmares. And then that's when I realized, not at one time, but I started to unfold that these nightmares were actually my life. And I guess that's a very typical thing. I didn't know. I had no idea. Um, I lived in Spain at that time, and so I mean, I just moved there, and so I didn't really speak the language. And way back in my day, we had the public library. We didn't have internet. We didn't have. I mean, we didn't counselors were only for crazy people, what we knew. And so I really was limited in resources on where I was going to go. And when I confronted my mom, she was like, how? So I'm half Mexican and half German. So we're a cultural family. And I remember my mom's like, why would you say that? I'm getting along with your father so well, and I thought, oh gosh. And then I remember going to my dad and saying, "Dad, did you ever touch me?" And he was like, "No, and why would you say that? And did you read it in a book? Did you see it in a movie?" And then he was sort of he kind of played this other one like I was delusional or crazy. He goes, "Are you okay?" And then I thought, this doesn't feel right. And like none of this feels right. And then I went on and asked him more questions. And
Good for you.
I just kept on asking. I was just staring. He has big blue eyes. I remember staring at him and he was deflecting. And I remember thinking, oh, well, I'm 16. He's a big fat liar. That's what I thought. He's lying to me. And I think this is really true. And that's why I said, no, no, none of this makes sense. And I have to say, when I came to the reality and I had my journal and I had dreamt these dreams multiple times over and over again, it felt like I was looking through a broken glass that had shattered into thousands of pieces. And I was putting each piece back.
Mm. Your
And
memory.
yeah, the memory of that. And once I had the stories, they were all slightly deviation. Maybe one dream would have like maybe the coloring of the room. Maybe it was a little bit darker one time, or maybe my dad added a different part of the sentence when he was talking or expressing himself. And so it was when I came out of this, I have to say I was so depressed. I loathed myself. I thought my life was a lie. I couldn't believe that this was me because, as far as I knew, in this dissociation, and I thank God that my brain stopped and it allowed me just to be a kid. But I really thought my life, I lived in Arizona. We went swimming every day, and I thought my life was about swimming pools and Barbie dolls. I had no idea that this had happened in my life. And when the reality came down, I thought, this hurts so bad. I don't think I want to live anymore. Like, I don't think I want to live. I don't know. I didn't know how to make it stop. I didn't know where to get resources. I never heard of anybody becoming sexually abused by their parent. So I think that was, I mean, I thought, well, like, who are these people? I don't know. I've never heard, I mean, I've heard stories about it, but I couldn't believe it was me. Let's just say that.
Mhm. And how did you navigate that? So you're 16, you're confronting your dad, your mom is skeptical. How did you like, did he ever get to a place where he admits it? And then how did you get to a place where you could start like processing what happened and then start healing from it?
Good question. I have to say, he didn't admit it until he was like 82. So I went on with my life every day like a charade. And with my dad, later on, I had children, and I didn't want him being being in an old school family. We always kept, no matter what, we always supported family. That's what we have been taught to do. I think just culturally, we have always supported a family. If you're older, we take them in. And I think if you're mentally ill, you're still family. So um I would greet him at the door and I would say, "Dad, you made your choice, but I'm making my choice. So you could come to the table, eat dinner, and then make sure you go to the bathroom and back. And if I catch you in any other room, then you have to leave." I would say this, I probably said it thousands of times. I said it over and over again. And he would always go, "Oh, honey, why do you say these things?" And then, or sometimes he'd go, "Just look at me," and then rub my face. And I thought, whatever, whatever. And it was really agitating to have him over it in my life. It was, but how do you have Christmas with a pedophile when other people are like, well, that's your story, but that's not my story. And why would you stir the pot up in our family? And so how do you have Christmas with a pedophile? So this was my solution on what I could do. I just worked within my boundaries. And was I resentful? Yeah. Um, and it was an obstacle, but I had to do what was right for me.
Wow. And so I resonate with the fact that you, like you said, you're half Mexican. And so in the Hispanic culture, there is a big, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's normalized
Yep.
to be protect the abusers. And
Yeah.
a lot of children that do come forward and say something in Hispanic households tend to not be heard. They get silenced. And so I'm so sorry that you went through that because I can only imagine like the type of confusion that you went through, but also that's like gaslighting, you know what I mean? Like, oh honey, like where are you, why, but it's like I know, my soul knows that something happened, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that must have been really, really tough. And so, okay, so the book touches on just this the path that you went on through different points in your life and and how you navigated that.
Right. And then it was sort of like this also affected my parenting, and it came back up when I had children. I was like, oh my goodness, I never had the freedom to, like, I let my children, say no. They talked back, and I would just think like, oh wow, like they're talking. Sure, I was upset, but then I never had the freedom of doing that. So, but how do you? I never was shown the example of how do you empower your kids and what's appropriate, and but still be a parent. I didn't want them to go crazy, but like how do you find the right balance in that? And I didn't have that, so I struggled in my parenting because I didn't have a lot of role modeling. So um I was always looking at other people, trying to find role models, reading, and I think it was through trial and error. And then I had a son with special needs, and that really opened up a whole other dynamic, because I felt that a lot of the things that I had learned from childhood, like the survival tools that I learned that carried me through, that helped me heal through that period, I went back and I used them again. A lot of the same tools that I used just to get me through a tough time. And some of those were just simple journaling. I was always on a budget. I ended up homeless because the medical bills were so extreme. His first surgery was $1 million because he was born with a rare brain tumor, and this was all experimental. And well, 20% of $1 million that I didn't have. And when you keep on accumulating this much debt, you're not going to be able to hold your home. You're not going to be able to afford anything. And so I had my minivan, and my kids and I remember it was summer, and I just said, we're on a vacation and we're traveling to the park. And they thought it was great. They had no idea what was going on. But those were some really soulful challenges and raising my kids. And I look back at what I had learned from a lot of this abuse and all these skills. And I didn't think that they were skills, but they were skills. And so journaling, mantras, I just swear by mantras, saying things, maybe 100 times a day, to change just the script that was in my head. Or when I take a shower, like words or emotions that I felt that these words owned me, like you're dirty or you're worthless.
Mm.
And so I would imagine the words slipping off of me. But when I was a teenager, I would take a felt pen and I'd write these words, and I take it in the shower with me, and I would just watch water splatter on it, from the side. And that worked for me. But I think later on I could do more visionary work on like really washing that off of me. I couldn't have taken enough showers to get the shame and the dirt off of me, but the words really helped with that. When I was taking a shower, I was consciously taking a shower, and um, that's visionary work. So, but all that became later on meditation, and more sophisticated. But when I was 16, I mean, I didn't know. I just thought, okay, that quote inspires me, or I can make up a mantra. I love my body. I love everything about it because I couldn't stand my body. So I think there were a lot of things that intuitively we know how to heal and fix. We think a lot with our gut and our intuition. Um, And that's kind of what I relied on. So it just started to expand. And from the point of 16, and now I'm 60, I'm a grandma. Um, I think that it's all been this journey to heal, to grow, to expand, and find my way through trauma and reach out to other people because I find that through this journey, when I look, I always felt alone. I always thought I was just like I was singled out, and I used to feel sorry for myself. But then when I started realizing when I got older that that we shouldn't suffer alone, that there's so many people out there, we just are not allowed the freedom of talking about it. And I think half the healing is recognizing what happened to you and then just speaking up and standing, expressing yourself through your voice. And that is the empowerment. And that's, I would have to say, half the healing. And then from there, it's your journey. You write your own script. That's your process. And how far you're going to take it, that's your, but that I found to be such a powerful step of just taking the plunge where I'm going to start speaking up, because it's terrifying when you start just even the thought of it, like, oh no, I could never do that, I can never be that person. And we have all these words, but you can. I think this is a place and a time of in our life right now where so many people, it's not just actors and movie stars, it's the neighbor next door, it's us, you know.
There's so much power in speaking up, and you're right. I do believe that that is like the beginning steps to healing. And because you need to give your abuse a voice. Like that inner child inside of you is like screaming for someone to listen to them. And so us as adults, now that we're in this space, like we get to do that for our inner child, is give them a voice. And so I can relate to that because I also had a moment. I went through narcissistic abuse, and I started to speak up and talk about it on podcasts, and I wrote a book. And I remember a moment where I was just in tears, like crying. And I'm like, God, I do not want to do this. I don't want to write about it. I don't want to do podcasts about it. And God was like, do it anyways. Do it anyways. And so I'm like crying and I'm like, okay. And in that process, you meet so many people that are afraid to speak up. And then they use our books and our stories and our speeches to be their voice. Sometimes it's females, but a lot of times it's men too. Have you ever been reached out by men that have gone through abuse?
So I think just being in the event industry, I'm dressed up and we're trying to organize like a fundraiser, that type of thing. And just being out there, somebody will come up to me and they happen to be male. They're like, Cindy, I follow you. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, cool. Like, great. And they're like, yeah, I follow you. Or oh, Cindy, I love what you're doing. I'm like, gosh, like, how does he even know what I'm doing? Like, is he talking about, the event industry? And then they're like, I love, like how you're standing up and you're speaking it out because there's so many people out there that need to hear this. And, after like 20 men at least, I think that's when I thought, that was like a big point where I thought, okay, there are men out there who really are looking for, help too. And I realized too, I would always ask, I said, do you think you could write about this? Do you think you could talk about this? Do you think you could, maybe message me? And then he's like, absolutely not. And what I learned is most of the time they haven't even shared it with their partner, their wife, had it changed some of their sexuality. I just thought, they were like, this has changed my life. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to get help, but listening to this, I just feel like I'm not alone.
Mm.
And when I listen to more people's stories, then I'm not alone. And how they search people and they look for people who they could relate to, um, same emotions, same feelings, you know, um, pain is pain, hurt is hurt, that's just part of the human experience. And so when that gets validated, you're like, oh, okay, I am not alone in this journey. And that's like a huge part of this. I think just the silence that we have to carry, and there's so much shame in this. but I'm hoping we'll make some strides in um, changing some of that so that it could open more conversations so that we can allow more discussions about this, and maybe changing some of our laws, maybe changing some of the ways we use for reporting. And that's kind of, that's out there. I don't have all the solutions. I'm just now focusing on just the voice.
Yeah. And there is so much shame that comes along with it, especially when you do finally get the courage to speak up and someone doesn't believe you, or someone downplays what happened, or someone minimizes the abuse. There's so many things that people do to protect, I don't know why, but protect an abuser, and then it just makes you feel like, if this ever happens again, I'm just not going to speak up. And it's true what you said. I think you had said 1 in 4 for women, 1 in 6 for men, but that's just people that speak up. So imagine all of the people that go silent and don't say anything. And that's
Right.
probably because at some point they maybe tried and someone told them to be quiet. And
I
so,
Yeah, yeah. If I think about how many times I've been in that situation, I remember there was like a teen time when I started talking about it. There was like a young adult time that I would talk about it. There was a time in my 30s, 40s where I talk about it, but every single experience every year was different. As I was getting older, I noticed more people were accepting. But I remember this horrible part where got a divorce, and I started dating again. And I thought, oh, well, I got to share this part of me because I want to know about this guy. If he has any skeletons in his closet, I want to know about, like, does he have a gambling problem? Does he, like, if I share, maybe he'll share. And I thought, this is important. I don't want to hide this, and I don't want to waste any time. So I would talk about this kind of, first couple of dates, I would kind of bring it out. And some guys would say, whoa, you are so much, this is so much baggage for me. I can't date you. I didn't even know this about you. You don't even look like that. And I would think, like, what does that mean? And I kept on hearing this over again. But I have to say, it really crushed me because I thought, we do often judge a book by its cover. And that was really eye-opening to me in an education. Like, there's like people don't like to do messy, and I get it. I mean, I get it. I don't like to do messy sometimes in just different areas. But how do you find a healthy relationship? I it's I'm sure it's very common. I hear with alcoholics, they find an alcoholic partner, but then it's also two people going through addiction. But that was a challenge for me. I have to say that was my, like, just wow, like, I'm just being rejected on different levels here.
it's tough. It really is tough. Do you feel that for someone that maybe got to a place where the abuser admits it or maybe apologizes, do you feel that that gives any sort of, I guess, I don't know if compassion is the word for the person that went through it, but does that help at all? Or is it more of like we have to do our own internal healing work? Because it doesn't really matter if they say sorry. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
You are wise beyond your years. That's what I have to say. I did not figure this out until my dad was, well, in his 80s, when I heard his when he finally came out and started talking about it. And I truly believed that I was owed an apology, and not only that, when I was younger, it had to be a certain kind of apology. So when he came out, and it happened to be during a video that I was interviewing him on, um, he said, I made you cry. And I remember I had every swear word in my head, like, really? I made you cry? That's your apology? And you're crying now too? And I remember throwing my hands up in the middle of the recording, and I had to, like, cool down because I just thought, okay, this for him, this is his apology. I made you cry. And that was his best, but it didn't make it right for me. And in that point, I realized, through time, after I was so disappointed, that I actually had the key, the power, that I had the words to heal myself. And I wish I would have figured that out sooner, because there's no apology. If you think about it, you argue with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or a husband or whatever it may be, or I don't know, somebody who's really close that could really rock your heart. And you think like, they should have said this. They didn't mention this. I wish they would have said this. There's We feel it more when we're closer to somebody. Um, and I think that's what I just wasn't mature enough. I think I just wasn't deep enough, where I needed like a certain apology. And when I started writing my own apology, that was my process. I started writing my own apology, what I thought he should say. And I remember I had like 4 or 5 pages of what the apology he should have said. And none of it really made any sense, but it made sense to me. And when I started rewriting the apology, it was basically just one sentence. And it was basically, I'm sorry, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this changed you. You
Mhm.
know, but I didn't know that. I had to some people have to bleed to experience the pain, and other people just get it. They get it for face value.
Mhm. You said that I'm wise behind beyond my years, and although I get it, I still am bleeding. Like I still still in the process. I get it, but I'm like, okay, but I'm still attached to like what I want it to look like. You know what I mean? Um, so interesting. And with that, like for example, even if they do apologize or, they acknowledge it, it still sometimes doesn't even come like the way that we want it to. Like how you said you had an idea in your mind of how you wanted it to look like. It didn't look like that. And then what I have found, or for me, is that I have spent most of my life people pleasing and being codependent because I'm like almost begging and searching and wanting a specific like outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to a point where you're like, you're never going to get that. It's apples against oranges. You know what I mean? And so it's like getting to that place where you can be okay with, the dream, the fairy tale dream that you've created in your mind. It's really hard.
It is really hard. Um, I've been married for 25 years, and it's still things that I look like. Just the other day, my husband and I went into counseling, and now it's like just so common for us, like, oh, we have this issue, let's go to counseling. And it's so easy for us because we just hash it out right now, where I didn't have the skills back then. But it was something, it was just like we just couldn't figure out what it was. And he was saying, hey, I think you could have done better. You should have said this. And I was like, well, you should have said this. And when you go to counseling and somebody helps you as a middle person, middleman, it was just like, oh, okay, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And really, honestly, in a half an hour, we were like, we figured it out. But I didn't I think if I look at that half an hour, and I wish I could have figured that part out in my half an hour, where instead of 40 years, 45 years, 50 years, where I just wish I had your insight, or just even the idea that it could come from. But I might have been dismissive about it too. So it was just my journey.
Yeah, I mean, I have the insight, but like I said, I'm a little stubborn sometimes still. So I'm like, I revert back. We take 10 steps forward and then we take like 5 back. And then it's like, it's a constant process. Healing is like up and down. So it's hard. I did want to ask you, what do you think for our reader or our listeners and viewers, what do you think are some signs that people should look out for? Because I know, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about like physical abuse. People think that physical abuse is punching and hitting, right? But
Mhm.
physical abuse can also look like grabbing someone or holding them in a room and keeping them in the corner. It could mean a lot, like flicking at them. That's physical. What about like sexual abuse? As far as like, what are some signs that people should look for that they might minimize sometimes and think like, oh, it's nothing. That was nothing. It could be like gestures or even comments that people say.
Yeah, I found it to be so I'm just going to get real here. So I found it interesting when I've shared my story. They were like, "Well, what did your dad do?" And I would say, "Well, he would fondle me." My dad was really into pornography, so he would take pictures of me. Um, and I think he was into child pornography. So he would take pictures of me in the middle of the night and dress me up, and I was in my underwear, but like certain shoes, that type of thing, and then where I'm smiling and not smiling. And that pornography is sexual abuse. So it doesn't necessarily mean penetration. It's it's abuse. So whatever when you're questioning something about somebody else and you're thinking, that's not sitting right with me, flicking on the head or, um, some really degrading comment where you think like, gosh, and I'm still thinking about this 2 weeks later. And am I that? What am I that? Am I stupid? And I think that's emotional abuse. And especially when you start to get stuck where you're reading their script and you're starting to behave like, oh yeah, and you're starting to alter your who you are. So I think physical and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, they start off very benign, and that's how they groom. That's how they groom. And then before you know it, you start to question yourself and you're like, well, that's not like a really big, I mean, what am I going to tell a friend that he did that, he flicked my arm, then you're going to go, oh, you're crazy. So I think that's how we start to dismiss it. And but I think it's good to note it before you know it. I know my mom was definitely emotionally abused. My dad never hit her, but he threw things around her all the time. No, he didn't hurt her, but he broke everything around her and terrified her. And that is physical abuse. He would take her favorite things and destroy them. Emotional abuse, where you're going to be out on the streets and where are your kids going to how are you going to eat, and fear. So I think even that, like, you're going to be nothing without me, those are really strong words. And when you start to believe them, that's when you already start to have lost a lot of your power, a lot of your self-esteem. And so it's good to question all that, but it starts slow and it's a grooming process. And when some people, I don't know why exactly, but I think it has a lot to do with who their hardwiring and then also loss of control. They like to take other people's power, to empower them.
So, two things that you touched on as far as like I was thinking about like your mom. Your mom was going through emotional abuse. And I honestly I just recently learned at the age of 36 that throwing things at the wall or breaking your things, that's physical abuse. I didn't know that until this year. But sometimes when our parents are going through any type of emotional, physical, spiritual, financial abuse, when the children come up to them and bring it to their attention, it's so easy for them to dismiss it because they also have been gaslit their whole lives.
Mhm.
Like, is this true? Am I, you know what I mean? And so, a lot, or like how you mentioned, a lot of times, like there was no internet back in the 90s and the 80s. There was no internet. There was no counseling, readily available for us. So it's like, what resources did they have at that time? And I'm also thinking about what you said as far as like I'm thinking about like people at jobs. Like when you go to a job and if someone were to like just brush up on you and go like that, you'd feel uncomfortable and be like, why is this coworker touching me inappropriately? Even though that's not penetration and it's not like anything that's too sexual, but it's paying attention to those little signs because they do grow over time and they become something bigger than what it is. But I want to thank you for sharing your story because I think it's important for people to know that it's not just penetration or physically punching someone. It could be someone looked at you, your parent looked at you inappropriately and took photos of you and was fantasizing something with you that's inappropriate, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of times, like you said, we get confused on like, is this for real? Did I really go through this? Did I imagine this? Is it like they're telling me that it's not, but so it's like a lot of questioning and trying to figure it out. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Sure. I think it's we're a lot more aware. I remember having bruises on me as a kid and, them, people seeing it, but it wasn't a broken bone. So then nothing was done about it. And I remember my mom taking us, she ran away 4 times because my dad was he was just viciously verbal abusive to her. And I think he broke her down emotionally into a million parts. And I found that when I would watch her, that the words actually were harder than anything else. And I felt even for myself that the physical stuff, it's kind of weird. You're like, okay, they're going to heal. But it's how your belief system of what you think about yourself, that's the thing that takes longer to heal. It's a wound that you can't see. It's a wound that you could hide for a while, but those masks come down. And that is something that lingers around.
That's so true. What would you say to someone that might be listening that maybe hasn't gotten to a place yet where they have maybe found acceptance for what they have gone through? What would you recommend for them? Like, what are the first steps to like maybe speaking up and opening up about it?
Mm, I think sharing with a friend, somebody that you really trust. Um, you could even start like, hey, you don't have to say anything. I just want to talk. You don't say anything. I just want to talk and I just need this off my chest. And you could just listen to them. And often I found that people would say, well, can I say something now? And I'm like, yeah, kind of skeptical because I had been burned so many times. And I have to say, I was really surprised at how many people had compassion for me and really gave me great advice. And they were like, okay, so your dad's home. What do you want me to do? I said, just stand by me. Just be by me. You don't have to do anything. Just be by me. And I just needed to know that I had somebody. I know that they couldn't have protected me, but just physically, just somebody standing there. Um, it felt like protection, and that's what I needed. And I think you have to navigate through what it is that you need, but you have to recognize what you need and pick the person. And if it doesn't feel right and they were just blank, then that's not your person. Go on to find somebody else. There's also 1-800 numbers, counseling where they could give you great advice. There's a lot of agencies out there that offer free counseling, or counseling on a sliding scale fee, or you get involved in community that deals with different forms of trauma. And there's so many people out there that want to help, that know how to help. And it's just a matter of you recognizing like a 1-800 number and they'll connect you to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just getting the support that you need, finding out what support you need and then going and getting it, right? I feel
Hmm.
like even just a friend just standing there with you is support in itself, just to know like, okay, you got my back. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So you had mentioned to me offline that the book is going to be translated in Spanish. When is that going to come out?
I'm so excited. So, Under the Orange Blossoms is going to be translated in Spanish coming out in September. We're going to have the book released then. We're kind of going over the cover a little bit. I didn't want to have right now it's my face like kind of going in a murky water with oranges around me. And I kind of didn't want to have like, how often we look at people and they go, they don't look like me. So I can't relate to that. So I just wanted like a rendering of me or a sketch so that there was no color. I was just a girl, person, in the water, in the muck, in the thick of it. And so right now I kind of hope it's going to be that, it's they give you different designs on what your book could look like, and then you have to change it, sort of connecting it with the other books. So I'm going through that process right now. It's really exciting, but I really am happy to reach different people from different countries, or people here in this country who are only speaking Spanish. I feel that in the in the Hispanic culture, a lot of times there are, I think it's just from me going through it, that there's a lot of things that we just don't say, or we just kind of close our eyes a little bit, and it's a little bit more acceptable. It's it's just the way it is. It's a cultural thing. But I also understand, listening to other people, that a lot of that is the same way in other cultures too.
Yeah, it is definitely a culture thing, but we don't have to normalize it. It's one of the things that I have been very big on, being a Hispanic, is like standing up for, like, no, you're not gonna call my son that because it's normal in the Hispanic community, or no, you're not gonna address me that way. You know what I mean? Like really like standing up for myself of like, this isn't normal. This isn't normal and we shouldn't treat each other this way. You know what I mean? But I'm very excited for you that the book is going to be translated in Spanish. There's a lot of women and men in
I
the Hispanic community that need your book. So super excited for you. Where can our viewers and listeners reach out to you or purchase the book if they're interested?
Probably the best place is on Amazon, because I think it's easier. Everybody has a little Amazon app somewhere. Um, that's probably the easiest, but I really am on every Barnes and Noble, Goodreads, you name it. I'm on that platform, but I just find that Amazon is just the easiest, it's quickest way to purchase the book. And you could reach me. I have a blog and also a website where pretty much all the videos, every podcast is going to be translated in Spanish. And also my website, all the newsletters will be in Spanish too. So I was just thinking, I know this is way out there, but a lot of moms, we can't really listen when we're nursing, or the kids are asleep. We can't really see what's going on. So it'll be like subtitled so that you could listen to it, without your iPod, your headphones on. So I thought, well, that's also too, we go through a lot of this cycle, and that's a very typical thing. What happens when you have children is that we get almost triggered in a sense, because it takes us back to our childhood, and most of sexual abuse happens in our younger years.
Mhm. It really does.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm like I said, I got the book, so I'm excited to dive deeper into it. I feel like we connect on a lot of different levels. It was so good speaking with you today. And so I just want to thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I truly, truly appreciate you.
Well, I love what you're doing. Seriously, you're just lifting so many people up in your work. So thank you. Thank you for letting me be on your show. It's great.
Thank you. And guys, if you are listening or watching, as with anything, make sure that you subscribe, you like, you share it with a friend. And we will see you on the next episode of the Book Publishing Academy podcast. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye.